Waiting for the little bat. There we go. Awesome.
So, can you see my slides?
We cannot. Oh, yes, we can. Yes, we
I think
can.
they're loading. Excellent. Okay, great. It works. Okay. So, quite a controversial title, but let's start at the beginning. So, the Green Movement help slow or prevent climate action. Now, I've been part of this movement for a long time. Let me start by saying that this was me about 12 years ago. This was when I was more of an activist before I kind of got into environmental journalism. And I was arrested at lots of different protests. In this picture, I was part of the Camp for Climate Action. It was not a huge movement. It lasted for, several years, but never really amassed a mass kind of body of followers the way that Extinction Rebellion did. And here we were shutting down banks that were investing in tar sands. And really, and they were kind of, taking people off the land in order to build the pipelines and to get drill for tar sand. So really, I haven't changed my position on a lot of these issues, but I've changed the way that I approach them, and also kind of been in this long enough to say some things work and some things don't work. So, I've given lots of talks over the years. I've been on television, nationally, internationally. If anyone hasn't seen my work, I've got a website, theonlights.co.uk, and I'm very much in this movement. So when I speak to you, I am speaking as someone who's been very involved. This is another photograph. This is from about 10 years ago, maybe a bit longer than that, at an anti-nuclear protest. When you're in green groups, you are typically, and you're just you learn that nuclear is bad. Nuclear is bad, wind and solar is good. That's just kind of what you learn. And, if you don't question it, that's just what you believe. And that's what I believed. So, and instead of questioning that, I kind of used to just promote renewables as this thing that we need that will get better over time. So we do need renewables and we do need solar power. It's in the IPCC data. But the issue is what you see here, which is it's intermittent. So this is the same for wind as well. So when it's not windy enough or it's not sunny enough, our power drops, and the power generation drops, and then we end up burning more fossil fuels. And this is a situation the UK is in. So at the moment, we're quite good. We don't use coal, but we use about 60% gas every day. Every day we burn about 60% gas. That's bad, right? We need to get away from that. But we also, when our wind and sun isn't at capacity, when it is at the height of summer, like you can see on this chart, then it's great. But when it isn't, we have to import coal to fill the gap. So this is bad, right? We don't want to do this anymore. And it's kind of why I stopped promoting renewables, because I felt like, well, first of all, lots of people do that already. And secondly, we need to deal with this issue of intermittency and what the backup power is. I felt like I knew all of that, but I felt quite overwhelmed. And I thought, well, maybe the solution actually is to lower your carbon footprint. So I authored this book, a publishing deal by New Internationalist. It was endorsed by Natalie Bennett, who was the leader of Green Party. McKibben endorsed it. He liked that it had a chapter on vaccines in it. It had quite good coverage. It was in the Telegraph, it was in the Guardian. Again, gave lots of interviews on it. And I was just promoting lowering your carbon footprint. So I have quite a low carbon footprint. I never learned to drive deliberately, or cycle or walk or get the bus. And what I learned through doing this over years is actually, A, it's quite hard to do, and I'm not surprised that more people don't do it. But B, even though I do it, even if all of us did it, it's really an insignificant amount of energy that we save. That's kind of where I've landed at. And that's through looking at numbers and data. So even though I wrote this book, that's what I am now saying. And the thing that woke me up to this was this report. This is a Zero Carbon Britain report, which is the data that we have on how to get the UK to renewable energy, 100% renewables, and that's it, right? So all the Greens love this. The Green Party promotes it as part of the energy policy because, they want 100% renewables. But when I read it and I saw that it says that we need a 60% reduction of energy, I was just baffled, frankly, because I have spent a lifetime trying to get people to lower their footprints by anywhere near like nowhere near 60%, you know, maybe 10% is achievable. 60% just not going to happen. And I honestly don't know how people think it can happen. And 10, 15 years ago, I was more optimistic of saying maybe it will happen. Maybe renewable battery storage will get better and we'll have alternatives. It hasn't happened, right? We have to face up to the fact that that hasn't happened. And I still hear those arguments used today. And I think, well, we don't have another 10, 15 years to waste. We need to act now and bring down our emissions. And this is what we're talking about. 73% of our energy emissions come from energy. You know, that's a huge amount, and that's not going to happen through us personal changes. So although we should do those things, and we should do things that, you know, protect biodiversity is a separate issue. In terms of climate change and bringing down emissions, we've got to replace the energy we're using. And actually, I don't know if you follow any of this, but if you've seen recently with cryptocurrency and the kind of rise of that, I haven't been following it too closely. I don't massively understand it, but what I will say is I've seen that it uses massive amounts of energy because it's all used online, and people are calling it out and saying, look, it's not low carbon, it should be banned. I don't think it's going to be banned. I don't think, you know, India's using it. I think lots of countries are using it. I don't think it's going to be something we're not going to use going forward. And yet it uses huge amounts of energy. So I think actually, again, it comes down to this question, well, where do you get the energy from? Let's just make that clean. And then it's okay that people continue to use it, because actually humans are really good and clever at using more energy, not less. And what can we use that has the lowest impact on land and species, on people as well, and especially people in developing countries, but I'll get to that in a minute. So I started to look into solutions, and I became really interested in poverty. So this is, my parents migrated here in the 60s when Birmingham was going under this kind of industrial boom. And this is me sat on my mum's lap in the Punjab. It's a very poor area of India. Millions of people live there. And, you know, I've always cared about poverty and thought we should be doing things to help these people. I never, in the environmental movement, I've never been able to marry those things up. If anything, there's never really been the space for that conversation. I think that is because it's a certain demographic that tends to be in those movements. I also think that actually someone needs to be out there talking about poverty and, you know, what we're basically doing when we say, wow, everywhere should just have 100% renewables and rely on intermittent power, is we're telling these countries that they can't develop. And environmental NGOs are doing this. They are telling these countries that they can't develop because they're saying that we don't want them to use coal. And I completely understand that. We don't want them to burn more fossil fuels. Fossil fuels got us into this whole mess that we're in now. But at the same time, we need to develop the same way that we develop so that we have a high quality of life. And when I say that, I'm not talking about, you know, just people having lots of money. I'm talking about high quality of life, things that we have that we take for granted. Lighting, able to just turn a switch on and having light when it's dark outside, you know, having fuel to cook on, vaccinations, access to healthcare, access to hospitals. All of these things come with having a high quality of life that is developed through infrastructure, which requires vast amounts of energy. That's what we did, right? In the wealthy developed countries is what we did. We spent vast amounts of energy. You know, it's just good. We got to have everything that we have today. We have a high quality of life. Unfortunately, it also drove global greenhouse gas emissions up and is now, you know, continuing to cause climate change. And so from my perspective, from a lot of environmentalist perspectives, it's on us, and it's almost a moral obligation that we get those emissions down so that, you know, some of these countries will even have that chance to develop as they want to. It's up to us. You know, as I said earlier, we're using about 60% gas every day. You can check this any day. You can go to electricitymap.org, and every day it will tell you what the energy mix is. So you'll see when the kind of wind, sun comes down, the coal goes up. Most days we don't use coal, thankfully. And you can see that it's about 60% gas, something like 12% nuclear, and then the rest is a mix of renewables. So let me go back to energy. So I started looking at what are the solutions? What does India need? What does Africa need? How are they going to do this? And is there a way to do it without using vast amounts of fossil fuels? Because that's what we did. That's all I know about, you know. And now I'm saying let's not do that anymore. That's bad. These countries need to have an option. And actually, people in these countries are going to suffer impacts of climate change the worst. In fact, I say that they're already suffering in many of these countries, and they don't have the protections that we have in the developing world. And I think there's something wrong here in the developing world where we worry about, you know, societal collapse. And the fact is that 2 billion of our fellow humans already live in a state of collapse because they live in these apocalyptic scenarios we're afraid of. They live in serious poverty. So I did a real rethink. I had to challenge a lot of my beliefs to do this. And this is kind of why I'm taking this message out there, for free, because I feel that I wish someone had told me this 10 years ago when I was maybe even promoting the wrong solutions to climate change. And if you look at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, the IPCC report, it has a whole section by Working Group 3 on energy. And that it's very clear about what we need. And it has in there renewables, nuclear, and carbon capture storage. And it says that we need about 50% nuclear. And as I said, we're on about 12% at the moment. So I got worried, fallen for fear mongering. Had I fallen for conspiracy theories when I wrote my book, The Ultimate Guide to Green Parenting, and had a chapter in there on vaccines.
Excuse me, sorry. Your slides have stopped showing. I'm not sure if it's an internet connection thing, or I think it probably is.
I can see it, so maybe I'll stop and start again.
Have you gone onto a website? Because if you just shared the PowerPoint,
I do like to show them. Okay, let me try again. Can you see now?
Not quite. No, it's just. I think it might be an internet thing, to be honest.
Is that everybody can't see them?
No.
No, I can't see it either.
That's really frustrating.
It was sharing for a moment or two, like beforehand, up until pretty much just now. But yeah.
I might put them in the link so you can have a look, because they're quite important, because they've got a lot of data on them, and I don't like to just make assertions without data.
That's fair. Yeah. If you send a link to the chat, and then we can put it up with the recording and stuff, and we can skim through. Awesome. Maybe
Rosie, you can screen share it for her.
That's a shout. I could try that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll give you access, and then you have a go.
I've got to request access. If you could, via Google Slides, if you just change the permissions, so anyone with this link can view.
Yeah. Right. Hang on. Let me get out the share mode.
Oh, I love the technical.
Like the hazards of doing events online, isn't it?
Yeah.
My fiber broadband is letting me down.
Ah, damn.
Or I don't know, actually. It normally does work on Zoom, so I don't know.
Teams is usually pretty good. I think it's just, internet, the life of being online.
Yeah, this might be a busy time, actually. Okay, so hopefully you can see that now.
Yes, I can.
Made it public. Okay, great.
Perfect. And I can try and screen share for you, if that.
So we're down to number 11.
Awesome source. I will try and screen share. Awesome. Can people see my screen?
Yeah, I can see that. Yes,
yeah.
That's working great. You're good.
Great. Okay, great. Thanks for that. Okay, so when I wrote my book, The Ultimate Guide to Green Parenting, I included a chapter on vaccines, and I had a lot of debate and discussion about this, because some people said, well, that's got nothing to do with green issues. And I said, well, actually, if you care about poverty and eradicating disease, I think it's a social justice issue. And then other people who said, well, you can't include that because they were anti-vaxxers. And there's a lot of anti-vaccinators in the kind of green parenting movement, which I was a part of. I was an editor of a green parenting magazine for several years, Juno magazine. And so I included it anyway. And what I said was, look, all it is it's explaining research and what the data is, and it's just breaking it down, and you can make your own decision. But when the book was printed, I had lots of praise. I had Bill McKibben gave me that brilliant endorsement, because he liked that chapter, and he said this is really important that this is included. Other people were really upset about it, and they said, they called me a big pharma shill. I have no links to the pharmaceutical industry, and I kind of thought, right, am I doing something wrong here? How do I learn to communicate to these people about data. So I got really interested in data, and I went back to university and did a master's in science communication, because I wanted to learn how to talk to these people. So the first thing I did was started looking at data. So I found this Our World in Data. This is a really good site with really good numbers. It's made by the Oxford University team. And, you know, it's irrefutable. Their numbers are irrefutable. So anything that you see on there, you might find it surprising. They write a lot about poverty. There's a lot of stuff I've read, I've had to change my mind on. But this was the first thing that I came across on energy. And I was completely shocked, because all I'd ever been told in the green movement is that nuclear energy is really bad. It kills loads of people. It's really dangerous. And if you look at this, actually, this is like literally the number of tests they're going by. It's just as safe as wind and solar, and it's actually safer than hydropower as well. Not that I wouldn't say we shouldn't use hydropower, but that's how safe it is, you know. And actually, we're at the top of the ones we need to stop using. And I had to completely change my opinion, had to completely change, you know, this was something I used to protest against. And I read up on it more. I read up on things like radiation. The next slide. I've been told, you know, radiation's really scary, avoid it, it's dangerous. And I learned actually it's natural, it comes from space, it's in people, it's in food. Bananas are above average radioactive. And this shows you about how much actually comes from any kind of nuclear energy generation. Like, it's so low. You find it in natural levels everywhere. So I changed my mind on that as well. And, you know, then I read upon waste. This is another fear I had. I've been told waste is really dangerous. And I learned that nuclear waste has never killed anyone. It's never harmed anyone. This is a really beautiful nuclear waste management facility in the Netherlands, which is also an art museum, which is open to the public. Sorry, that's in the next slide. Yeah, you're on it. And basically, in the next slide, you can see inside. So it's an art gallery and it's a cafe open to the public. And those kind of canisters are where they store the waste. So basically, they take the uranium out of the ground. It's radioactive, yes. Use it. So they take all the energy out of it, and then they just bury it again. That's how it works. And it's really well managed. So if you think at Fukushima Daiichi, when power plant was hit by an earthquake which triggered a tsunami, around 20,000 people died from the tsunami, but nobody died due to the meltdown. This is another thing I believe that I'd had wrong, basically. And actually, they had this waste stored on site, and it just wasn't damaged at all. And I mean, you know, obviously, if it was, you would know about it, you would hear that story. But I had all these fears that were based on kind of hearsay that weren't really things that had happened. So if you go to the next slide, so this is kind of where I ended up at, you know, back in this place where 10 years ago I was being called a, you know, big pharma shill, and now I get called a big nuclear shill and a big industry. All the time you get this when you stand on the side of science, but I actually think it's so important, because if you look at what's happening now, this is why I went into science communication. There's this real degradation of science, of trusting science. It's dangerous, right? It's dangerous. If you think with the COVID vaccine, if people don't, you know, enough people don't take it, then it would just go on forever. Basically, it will just continue, and we need to eradicate it the way that we've managed to eradicate so many other diseases. And I don't think I need to make that massive case for vaccines, but it's interesting with energy because I do have to make it for nuclear, and yet it's just as safe. You know, it's just as important when you think about climate change. If climate change wasn't happening, I really wouldn't worry. I wouldn't really care about nuclear. But let's go to the next slide. This is the situation we're in. So if you look at this, it shows you emissions, and in Europe, Britain's not on there because this is recent data. And if you look at one of the best energy mixes, let's look at France, which is in the yellow box over there, 3%. So France in the 70s put a load of nuclear power stations because they wanted to not import oil anymore. They wanted energy independence. It wasn't really for climate reasons. Now, because they've kept them running, they have about 70% of their electricity comes from nuclear. So they actually have a really clean mix. So they don't have a lot to do bring down their emissions. Whereas Germany reacted really badly to what happened in Fukushima, and they decided to shut down all of their nuclear power plants. And this is their emissions. They're basically the dirty man of Europe. They have really bad emissions. They have put lots of money into renewables, which is good. Choosing to phase out nuclear before coal, ended up having to import more coal. That's why their emissions are so bad. And I mean, you know, it's just baffling to me that anyone can say we're in a climate emergency and we need to do something serious about this. We need to bring down our emissions. And then this is happening in wealthy developed countries, which could quite easily actually just lower their emissions. And, you know, this irrational fear that Germany has where they've decided to shut down their nuclear, actually, in Japan, they're building more reactors, and they've just built several that have only taken 3 years. They've got really good tech out there, much better than ours, which is slow because it's, you know, money just isn't put into it. And the reason Japan's doing that is because, you know, they want a clean energy mix. And when they shut down Fukushima and some other power plants initially after what happened there, they experienced blackouts, and actually because of the blackouts, public opinion shifted, and the energy minister just the other week recently came out and said, look, actually most of the public is in favor of having more nuclear. We're going to build more. We need more to meet net zero, and it's really positive over there, which is interesting. Germany's got stuck in this place when Japan is moving forward. And also, just a note on blackouts, this is something I've talked to environmentalists about from kind of my generation, or the older generation really, who I've spent a lot of time campaigning with in the past, and they've just kind of said, wow, we should learn to live with blackouts, Eon, you know, we can have intermittent power. And I just think it's such privilege of not understanding what that means. And I know what that means because I've seen my cousins in the Punjab who live in absolute poverty. Blackouts are serious stuff. You know, that means that hospital equipment isn't running, right? That means if you have a coronavirus vaccine, to be stored at a specific temperature in a fridge, if there's a blackout, all of those vaccines are rendered useless. Like, energy is so important, and the fact is that we're energy rich, you know, and we should be proud to be energy rich because it means that our children live longer and they breathe cleaner air and they're healthier. All of those things are good, right? At the same time, energy inequality is a real thing. It's really happening, and we need to get on top of it. If you look at the next slide, it shows you you know, where we've already done this. It shows you where places already have a clean energy mix. It's not that hard, you know, Britain should have done it by now. Why hasn't Britain done it? Because green groups have protested against having nuclear for so long, and because hydro isn't an option here, because it's to do with being low land. So we have a little bit of hydro, but we're never going to be able to have as much as somewhere, you know, like Sweden. So we need to really what the IPCC says, which is they've crunched the numbers and they said we need about 50% build of nuclear. We're not doing it. We're actually shutting down our old reactors, and we're not going to have anything to replace that. And that's going to go to fossil fuels. So actually our energy use is going up because population is going up, and we're shutting down our clean energy. We're going to end up with higher emissions going forward, higher emissions, not lower. People are always shocked when I tell them this, but, you know, again, you can look it up. So next slide. This is the most bizarre thing to me is, so first of all, nuclear, you know, issues with nuclear are not technological, they're political. And that's because green groups, including groups that I used to be in, have dominated the narrative on what constitutes clean energy. It's very similar to if we allowed anti-vaxxers to dominate the narrative, or climate deniers to dominate the narrative on climate. And we have to not allow that. That's what's happened for a long time. And, you know, if we're realistic about our fears, you know, I've shown you how safe nuclear is. I've shown you, you know, that it barely harms anyone. It's clean. The IPCC is behind it, which means there's a massive scientific consensus behind it. It's not just one or two people. It's a scientific consensus. World Health Organization and United Nations are also behind it. So that, to me, is enough for me to go, okay, I was wrong before. I changed my mind on that. But this is the staggering fact. Fossil fuels, the air pollution from fossil fuels kills 8 million people a year, and it will kill millions more through climate change. That's what fossil fuels will do. If you're going to be afraid of something, surely it should be fossil fuels, and it shouldn't be nuclear. It should be fossil fuels. You know, surely this is what we should be rallying to wean off of. And so next slide, you know, and this is a situation we've ended up in. So then I was kind of like, well, what happened? How did we get in this position? You know, why are green groups across the board actively campaigning and lobbying against nuclear, and even more so than fossil fuels? Why is Germany doing what Germany's doing? And you know, this is kind of where I've gotten to. I've looked at these different groups and organizations. I've tried to engage with these groups and organizations, and I've asked them what they're doing. And honestly, it's about a lack of science literacy. It's about irrational fears. It's people who all want the best. I understand that. In the same way that an anti-vaxxer wants the best for their kid and they're afraid of their baby having a metal spike put into them. That's the way they see it. They think it's got chemicals, it's dangerous. And it's quite a mental leap for them to think, actually, it's going to protect my baby in the future from something that be so debilitating or dangerous. I can't even imagine it, because frankly, we don't live with those diseases anymore, thanks to the vaccine. So I started looking into where this came from, and this is where it gets really interesting, right? So fossil fuel companies are really clever, right? Let's be honest, they're really clever. They're like tobacco, massive industry, funded climate denial. We know this. We know about the Exxon New campaign. If you don't know about that, look that up. We know about BP funding, lobbying to stop climate action. They put billions into this. And they also knew if we have nuclear, and nuclear can replace them, right? So they decided to fight back. They decided to demonize nuclear. So the first thing they did was they funded environmental groups to campaign against nuclear. This is true. This is what really happened. This is a really interesting bit of the story. So in 1969, Goyle gave a founding donation of $200,000 people to start an environmental group. That group was called Friends of the Earth. Originally, it's not its purpose now, but originally it was set up purely to oppose nuclear energy. You can look this up. The money was provided by Robert Orville Anderson. He's the owner of Atlantic Richfield Oil Company, which owns thousands of gas stations. And I kind of stumbled across this. I was surprised it wasn't bigger news, but it was reported in the news. It just kind of got buried at the time. And, you know, the campaigns were successful. If you go to the next slide, Sierra Club, saying exactly the same thing happened. Sierra Club, which is more of an American environmental organization, accepted over $25 million in donations from the gas industry. The money came from Aubrey McClendon, who is the CEO of Chesapeake Energy, which is one of the biggest gas drilling companies in America. And they massively protest nuclear. They're one of the biggest, loudest groups actually do it. And, you know, it just goes on and on. The more you look into it, the more you see. So the next slide, they also funded, Goyle also funded these like groups that looked like they were activist groups. They looked like they were grassroots campaigns against nuclear. So from this leaflet, that's what you think, right? In 2017, they founded this group in America, and all across the states in America, they were kind of, you know, targeting people, putting leaflets through doors. They were Facebook advertising, they were phoning people, and they were saying, look, we shouldn't fund nuclear. Look at this. They called it a bailout. We shouldn't be funding nuclear. It's dirty. It's dangerous. It's not safe. They told them about waste. They told them about radiation. If you look up there in the corner on the leaflet, it says this was paid for by the American Petroleum Institute. This is a real leaflet. This is a real campaign. You can Google it and look it up. It's just shocking. The more you learn about it, the more you think, actually shocking. It makes sense. It makes sense because they don't want to lose their industry. The same way that they funded climate denial to try and stay in business, you know, funded fear-mongering against nuclear energy because they desperately don't want it. And if you don't know, the American Petroleum Institute is the lobbying champion for oil and gas companies. Like, they're right in their very, very rich organization. And the thing that worries me most about climate action is people don't realize how powerful these companies are, and that they are not going to go quietly. And the API, you know, it endorsed Donald Trump's trade deals, and it lobbied heavily against electric cars. So it's not just about energy, it's all across the board. Wherever they have investments, they will protect them. So next slide. So this is how fossil fuel companies now make themselves look green. And, you know, again, people are falling for it, because I've heard environmentalists say, look, it's great. It's supporting renewables. They're putting money into renewables. And the next slide, you can see some more of those. The truth is, the reason goes back to that slide on solar that I showed you, with fossil fuel companies know if we just build renewables out, we build loads of renewables, because it's intermittent power, we will always still depend on gas. We will always still depend on fossil fuels, right? Meanwhile, the whole world is saying we need to get off of fossil fuels, but this is the truth. This is what it comes down to. So in fact, if you go to the next slide, this is a video. You just play a few seconds of this. This is a video that was made by Shell. You can watch it online. It had billions of views, and it shows you how much fossil fuels are embedded with renewables, because they understand it's intermittent power and it requires fossil fuels as a backup. Can you just play a little bit of that one? You might need the sound.
I can't actually get the sound to work for
okay.
whatever reason.
It
So
captions,
it has captions. You just missed the nice French accent.
okay. Come on.
Right. Okay. I think you've seen enough of that. That's by Shell. You can see in the top corner there. That's a real advert that they put out. It's ridiculous. Mr. Natural Gas taking advantage of unreliable Mr. Renewables. That's the world that they want. And it's a world without nuclear. So next slide. Green groups, what are they doing in response to this? They're celebrating it. They celebrate this is a tweet and something of their website, Greenpeace's website, that I lifted, but they're doing it across the board. They're celebrating fossil fuel companies because they're saying, hey, look, they're investing really heavily in renewables. Isn't this great? If you look at the next slide, you'll see exactly how much they're actually investing. So we can't fall for the hype. We can't fall for the lies. We don't have time to do this. We have to get our emissions down to net zero. We are facing catastrophic climate change if we don't do this. And I've been saying this for so long now, at least 15 years, and I don't see anything really changing. Yes, we're setting net zero goals, but until we actually do things like what the IPCC says we need to build and create in order to bring down the emissions, it's all just empty talk and nothing's going to change. And actually, we're just on this really awful steep slope, and we have to do something about it. And if that means changing some of our beliefs, then we have to do it. And actually, I think other environmentalists like me need to recognize that we slowed climate action by preventing the government here, or world governments, from building clean energy, which was nuclear. This is a serious issue. This shows you how much renewable energy investment is really taking place from the oil and gas industry. They're really not interested in doing this. They made a whole advert about it. They've got all the advertising that I've showed you. That's a small little bit of their advertising campaign, and it's convincing people again. And they're very clever at convincing people because they have huge departments with lots of money, and they convince people of whatever they want. And they did it with climate denial for years, and we have to stop letting them do it. We've really got to get our act together on this. And I worry that we're not, and I worry that environmental groups are still just falling for the fear mongering, and that nothing will change until that changes, which is why I'm giving these talks, which is not an easy thing to do, because I'm sure you can imagine I get attacked for it and called a, industry shill. I don't work or have any connections with any industry. But anyway, yeah, so I think I made my point there. So in the next slide, these are my children. This is why I'm doing it. We need clean energy. We need to start investing now. We need a decent future. Not just about them, actually. I think, we often worry about young people today. How are they going to survive? What's their future going to be like? But actually, they're going to be so well protected compared to my family in the Punjab. My family in the Punjab, they're already going to have to migrate, frankly. They're rice farmers. There's a huge problem with rice farming over there because it requires so much water. There's so much frequent drought now that it's becoming untenable for them to continue with farming practice that they've done for generations. They have very low carbon footprints. They don't drive or they don't have electricity. They don't have all the stuff we have. Just want to at least be able to eat, and now they won't be able to do that. So they're facing migration, and that's actually, sadly, millions of people around the world are facing that, if not billions, because of climate change, if we don't act to bring down emissions. It's not an easy fight. It's not easy for me to come and tell you this stuff. As I say, I have to admit that I was wrong. I worry about the future. I worry about the countless number of species going extinct. I worry we've got all this time now to act, and that we have a pathway, which is IPCC. And actually, IPCC offers several different decarbonisation pathways, but all of them include nuclear. And yet all of the green groups are anti-nuclear. And there's something in that really needs to be unpicked and has to change, because if it doesn't, none of the numbers add up to just meeting our energy needs with renewables. So what will happen is we will continue to use fossil fuels. So we have a choice to make. You know, some people are speaking out. It's not just me. So on the next slide, George Monbiot has been very vocal about nuclear, but he's also been quite heavily attacked. And this was years ago that he wrote this about, wrote a few different articles promoting nuclear power. And then he kind of went quiet and actually spoke about it. And it is because there's just so many attacks from old school Greens. And I just kind of say to these Greens, and I've been on, you know, I just went on a debate actually at University of Essex, debating an old school Green who just was all the fear mongering and, you know, wasn't accepting the data. And I just said, it's just time for you to step out of the way. You're doing damage here. And, you know, I've got kids to think about, and we have to think about actually having a net zero future, not a nuclear green future because that's what you prefer, but a net zero future and whatever means it takes to decarbonize. And, you know, on the nature front, you have to consider as well how much space these renewable projects take up, which is, I just saw a study, I only just saw it today, so I haven't actually put it in the slides. I tweeted it if anyone wants to have a look, because I did a little breakdown of it, and it calculated, it's 3 different organizations, 3 different bodies working together, scientific bodies working together, crunching the numbers, and then they compared results, and they all found the same thing. And what they did was they looked at California, and they looked at whether California can just run on renewables. So over there is a massive push to close Pueblo Canyon, which is their nuclear power plant, and build out more renewables. And they found that even if you could just have 100% renewable energy and have 100% solar panels, the report found there's not enough land to do it. So there's not enough land that you could put those panels on. So it's just completely impractical. The numbers don't add up. You still need to have some kind of backup. And, you know, actually, I think we should get the conversation even beyond that and start saying, well, we need to rewild land too. We need to protect our land. We need to take some of the commons back. You know, those rights have been stripped away over the years by landowners. We need to actually change the way we use land and change agriculture, and all of that's got to happen. We definitely can't just cover them all in what is someone's preferred source of energy when that's not what the numbers say we should be doing. So that's pretty much it. You know, I'm slides, just questions. I'm calling on people to speak up about the data, to stand up for data, to urge people to look into it themselves and see for themselves. You know, a lot of people do come to me and just say, I already knew this. You know, obviously we need nuclear. But the fact is that Greenpeace, groups like Greenpeace, are very heavily funded, very well organised. And just a few weeks ago, they had a mass protest in Spain against their nuclear plants, and it does work, because then you get countries like Germany shutting down their programs, and what it leads to is increased emissions. And sadly, I've spoken to a lot of these environmentalists myself, the kind of old school lot that are doing it. They've so embedded in their ideology, and it is about ideology. And I know this because I had the same ideology for so long. They're so embedded in it, you can't challenge them, and they get really, can get mean, frankly. If you watch from the debate I did recently, he did get quite mean, and the speaker had to kind of ask him to stop, because it's a very emotional issue. And for me, it's no different than when I used to debate vaccines with anti-vaxxers. It's a very emotional issue, and they get really upset. We have to stand for the data. We cannot solve climate emergency with wishes and our feelings. We can't do it. We have to use evidence. And if we don't, we might as well pretend there isn't a climate emergency, because there is no way that we will bring down our emissions and solve the crisis. Thank you. Any questions?
That's really interesting. Just not a question, but that is really interesting what you've just said. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really interesting to hear like all the data you've got, and I mean that's not something I feel like I've previously encountered, so it's very helpful to understand.
We're just talking in the chat, but I'm not too sure. Do you know exactly how nuclear waste is disposed of?
Yeah, so I showed you that Netherlands museum. So each country does it differently. So like in Sweden, they just have one room where they just store it all in the canisters and it's just left. In the Netherlands, they've done something a bit more exciting. That's all of their waste in that one room. So they put it all in a room. They've turned it into an art gallery. Sometimes it's stored on site. In Britain, they often just store it on site. In Fukushima, it was stored on site. It's in really thick canisters. Like they test these canisters with like literally, if you flew a plane into the canister, the plane would combust and the canister wouldn't. They're so thick, it's so well protected. But also I do have to say, people worry about this a lot. The waste is just like rods, like solid rods. The reason I admit this, I always say this, is because I have to admit that I used to think it was like a green, goopy, acidic liquid. And that's because I used to watch The Simpsons and it just sort of seeped in, you know, pop culture references. I found out it's just like little cylinders and they're solid, so they can't leak solid. And also, they're not acidic because they've got like a half-life, like their energy's been used, right? So actually, just bury them. I mean, you can literally just get a Geiger counter and go to somewhere, a nuclear, you know, you can go on tours of these sites. I'm going to go on some after the pandemic. I've been invited because of my talks and stuff. I'm really excited, and I'll take a Geiger counter and you can just measure how radioactive. So even if you don't believe it with your own, you know, if you don't believe all the data, you can take a Geiger counter, you can measure it yourself, how radioactive something is, and you'll find these canisters are less radioactive than like your partner. If you sleep next to a partner at night, you're exposed to their radiation. You know, all bananas are above average radioactive. So it's very safe. It's, you know, and I think you'd know if it wasn't, because it would be all over the news if it killed lots of people, right? The waste, and that's kind of the mental somersault I had to do.
Yeah, I think the current scare with it as well is that the half-life of nuclear waste is ridiculously long, even if it isn't directly harming anyone. It's kind of, how do you store and dispose of something that needs over like 10,000 years or whatever to completely decay.
Well, you know what? Do you know what though? That also is almost like a planted fear. I'm not saying that it's not something we should be worried about.
Yeah.
But no. But did you know that coal ash waste from coal is more radioactive than nuclear waste? I didn't know. I'll put a link in here from Scientific American.
Did not.
Honestly, when I found these things out, I was just like, how has this happened? And it has happened because we've been misled. And I believe things that weren't true. And if we're going to talk about waste, let's talk about coal waste, right? It is radioactive. It causes cancers. It's serious. We know coal's bad. We should get off of coal. And yeah, Britain uses it. Britain imports it whenever we need it. Germany burns a lot of it. It's responsible for so many deaths. And you just think, actually, all the fears are in the wrong place.
This is really interesting. So I did an engineering project when I was in sixth form, in which we had to engineer like a totally zero carbon city in theory and stuff. Mm-hmm. And basically what you've just said is basically what we found. We were like, hang on a second, we can't do anything by renewables. We can only power by 20% with renewables. And yeah, it's really interesting. And I totally wasn't aware about the whole fossil fuel companies funding a large amount of misinformation.
Yeah.
Astonishing.
Yep. Well, I don't know if you've seen any of if you haven't seen their billions they've poured into climate denial, that was quite well covered. So it's not beyond them to do it. Of course, they're going to protect their product. But the amount of time to tell people, if you really want to be against something, there's something right here, fossil fuels. And yeah, we can admit that it did give us a high quality of life. We got something good out of it. But now we know that they're destroying the planet. Like, we got one planet, that's it, guys. Species are just going, you know, extinct at alarming rates. We have, people are being threatened, people are being impacted all around the world, people in poverty, the worst. 2 billion people that are just, you know, I don't want to have to have my kids growing up and tell them the stories of what's happening. I would like to see us fostering out solutions, building out solutions so that it doesn't get to that state. But I'm worried that in the 15 years I've been involved in climate action, that hasn't happened. And part of it is because green groups have campaigned against one of the solutions, one of the biggest solutions, frankly.
What do you think the chances are that part of the reason people are so against nuclear power stations is to do with the whole link between nuclear power stations and nuclear waste and nuclear weapons and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think it's actually waste is a big one. Weapons is a big one. Waste, I find, is quite easily dispelled when you start to tell people about it, but weapons is like a fear that they just have. And what people don't realise is actually weapons came first, right? Weapons have been around for ages. Britain has weapons. It doesn't have a lot of energy. It has a lot of weapons. If you look at places like Korea, like one country has weapons and no nuclear energy, and one has nuclear energy and no weapons. So they don't necessarily go hand in hand. And I always say to people, the best thing to do is to take all of the resources that we're hoarding for weapons and just put it into energy. would be the best way to get rid of that, but actually I just think it's a different debate, and it's probably not going to happen. I mean, our government's just talking about more weapons, isn't it, which is just astonishes me that as if what we have isn't enough. Oh, it's enough to destroy the world. No, we need more. Let's get more money into that. Meanwhile, our climate change is just the biggest crisis that we've ever faced, and it is, COVID might feel like that. That's because we're feeling the effects of COVID now. Climate change is going to be worse going down the line. I don't like to scare people, but we have to be honest about that, and we have to do what we can to prevent it. I mean, imagine if we could have prevented COVID, right? Really, we could have prevented it. We could have. There was data that looked at what would happen if there was a pandemic, and there were lots of kind of virologists saying there's one coming. We haven't had one for a long time. There's a global one coming, and we could have had things in place like locking down, quickly stopping it. But just lots of stuff, quick testing. We didn't deal with it very well, and now hopefully we're learning those lessons, and next time it wouldn't happen again. But with climate change, it's all there right now. We're not going to be able to say later, oh, we didn't know what to do, now that it's like, really hard to just have a normal everyday life because the weather is so unpredictable, or so much of the world is underwater, things like that. We could act on it now. So the weapons thing, a lot of these older generations that I've spoken to is completely mixed up with weapons, because a lot of them are like C&D people. I mean, I used to be a C&D person, and I'm not for weapons at all. I don't confuse them because I've learned about the tech and they're just so different. And also, I used to protest against them, and now I think you're probably never going to get rid of them because all the countries would have to agree at once. I just feel like it's almost like it's created a stalemate, right? Because they have them. So I don't know, what can be done about that. Whereas climate change, something can be done about it. Something can be done to stop making it worse. And really, that fear of weapons is just, again, not really understanding basic science or technology. And I had Jonathan Porritt, who I had so much respect for in so many ways. He just wrote something in The Guardian the other month, just recently. It was last month. And it's literally, the headline was, "We don't need a techno fix for climate change. We don't need nuclear. We need to build out renewables on grid scale." And I tweeted him and I said, "Are you saying renewables aren't technology? Like, they manufacture, they use resources, they require mining. The lithium for the solar batteries requires mining. Wind turbine blades are huge. I'm not against it. I'm not against them. We need them as well. What the IPCC says, it's enough for me." But I was just baffled that that generation doesn't think that's technology, because it's like to do with the wind and sun. That's the level of science literacy we're talking about, frankly, and that applies to the worries about weapons. It's like they're just completely confusing different things.
It sounds a lot like some of the arguments against GMOs and stuff of their chemicals.
Everything's like
just brought up a load of scientists now.
Well, that's the same. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these groups are also anti-GMOs, but and I could easily do a talk on GMOs, but I feel like that doesn't necessarily threaten the future of our planet. Although there's a lot to be said for GMOs being able to help people who need, for example, drought-resistant crops. And if that debate starts to happen, I will jump in there, because we need them. And I know that the green groups are going to be against them, but it's really scary to me that the green groups hold the agenda and have the loudest voice on these issues. Lobby, they do protests, they're really loud and powerful about it, and they're completely not evidence-based. It's actually anti-evidence. It's scary to me, and I used to be one of them, so I know very much what it's like and how hard it is to break out of that. I at least hope they won't take other people along with them, like the younger generations, which is partly why I'm reaching out with these talks as well.
Just in relation to that, I'm just wondering, like, thinking theoretically, if you could avoid road bumps and sort of have everything done the way that you do it, could you see like a roadmap as to how we can do things going forward, like immediately followed by kind of like an end game?
Absolutely. I mean, the roadmap is the IPCC. If you look at this really big report, they've crunched the numbers. They've got the section on energy. They've got the section on land. They've got everything you need for biodiversity and emissions. It's all in there. You don't need me to sit down and crunch out the numbers. They've done it. I'm just kind of advocating for that, saying, all right, I understand it's heavy data and a lot of people don't look at it. Anybody who reports on it, anybody who protests, should only be going with that data, what they say we need, because it's the best roadmap we have. And actually, our government isn't going by it. They're not building more nuclear. They're building a little bit of more renewables offshore, but it's not very much. It's not very ambitious. It's not going to be enough to get us off of fossil fuels. It's not going to be enough to meet their own 2050 targets. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with that. Again, I don't even think that's like a sinister thing. I think it's just low science literacy. I doubt anybody in government, and I've spoken to a lot of these ministers actually myself, I haven't read the IPCC report. I don't know what it means. We need more of the communicators to take that information out there. I mean, I could do a whole presentation on just energy section or the land section, the agriculture section, or anything else, because they're all in there, but it's very compact data. So I think that's part of the problem. We need more scientists doing it.
Going forward, do you think for people, for example, for people like us who are just students, going forward, what would you say is the best sort of form of action for us? So would you say it's communication, or is it more protesting, that sort of thing? What would you say?
I think it's 100% communication. I mean, I'm a big advocate of protesting, and I have started doing a little bit here and there for nuclear, just because it's quite unusual and it gets news and people are like, what? They're protesting, they're rallying for something instead of being against. But I think also, I think we need both. I think also that protests, I have lots of different feelings about protests. I've done direct action, and I did it like way before Extinction Rebellion existed. I was in Extinction Rebellion, and I did lots of protests. I helped to close Waterloo Bridge. Because we did that, we got climate all over the news. Like, we did really good things. You know, we helped the climate emergency. That term came from us. You know, we got the net zero target to be set. That was during the time we were holding the bridge. Then Theresa May set the nearest net zero target. They do achieve this, but then on the other hand, if you don't have the communicators in place to make sure that changes that are made, climate emergency is, you know, solutions are evidence-led, or the net zero targets are evidence-led, you're missing like a huge segment, like a huge part of the picture. So all these people can call for it. All these people can want to do it. I think communication, and that's kind of why I've ended up doing it. Not that I wouldn't protest again, but I just feel like this is actually going to make the most difference, is to go out and tell that message, write articles, tell people, because until that shift happens, nothing will change. Nothing will change. You can keep protesting and picketing, and there'll be lots of different agreements to get to net zero by this, or to, you know, change that. But if you look at the data, none of that's happening. So, and actually, that's another thing that people don't look at the data, so they don't know it's not happening. They say, oh, well, you know, we've said we're in a climate emergency and we're going to get to net zero by 2050, and I'm like, how? Only how, and I'll believe you. But actually, if you look at it right now, there's no roadmap, and what will happen is we'll get to 2050, and then we'll all be protesting again. We'll all be doing it, because by then we'll be in a much worse position than now. We'll be more towards 1.5 warming, which is what the IPCC report is trying to keep us under. There's still safe levels. Yes, it's bad that the climate's warming, but it's solvable. We don't know what happens later if we leave it. We don't want to get there, right? That's bad. We should be warming the world. Let's not talk about that. It's horrible. It's not to get there. We really need, I think, the communicators. But if people have energy to do both, getting a protest is a good way to get your communication out there.
I'm just thinking.
I see someone posted the Ecosoc. Sorry, I see someone's posted the Ecosoc YouTube. It's really worth watching that, because it basically just makes all the same arguments I make. There's a lot of this.
Yeah, I was wondering why, because everything you were saying I'd heard before.
Yeah.
But it was
ASAP Science just did one, and what was the other one? Kyle Hill just did one for his channel. So it's basically the communicators are coming out and they're finally doing it and saying, right, what's happened here? We need to challenge this. But the problem is still that the environmental groups aren't on board, and I don't know what the solution is to that. On just continuing to communicate, and once the pandemic's over, I will be doing protests and inviting people to come along, just because it's a good way to get news, which helps you to communicate.
It's interesting because, like, this is the solution, pretty much, from what I've understood. So it's quite interesting to hear that.
It's so funny talking to you guys, though, because I do these debates with older people, and I'm just, you wouldn't believe. Like, I've literally been put on mute and been told, are you here for the industry? I'm like, I'm not. Look me up. I have no links to industry. I have a really long history of campaigning. Like, before, a lot of these people have been doing it, like in Extinction Rebellion. There's only 2 years people in there just and you guys are just like, yeah, this is interesting. I'm going to look into it. It's really nice, actually.
Just mentioned something very surreal that I just found out. Ecosoc actually did a video today. Do we need nuclear energy to stop climate change? 3 hours ago.
I haven't seen that yet.
What?
Excellent.
I've linked them all in the chat. The Kyle
Brilliant.
And
So I think it is shifting. I still don't know what's going to happen about the old school groups. For example, Greenpeace, they're heavily involved. They have a £1 million turnover or something. They're a big organisation. They're very, they do lots of good stuff as well, like out in the seas and stuff, stopping whaling or whatever. But I don't know if they'll ever stop on nuclear, and it worries me because they talk to politicians and they lobby and they have massive protests. And so you've got all the scientists over here saying this is really good. We should do. I mean, James Hansen, Dr. James Hansen. He's an ex-NASA scientist. People call him like the grandfather of climate change. He wrote one of the first papers alerting the world to it. He is really vocal about nuclear. I think I showed one of his articles in the Guardian. If you just put in James Hansen Guardian nuclear, you'll see he's written about it before with other climate scientists. And that was, you look at the date on that, it was like 8-10 years ago. This is not new argument. So how's that going to change? And I'm honestly, I'm not really telling you that I know the answer, because I don't. I do know that this is what I have to now do, because frankly, I need to undo the damage that I did before. And also, I think it's worth appealing to people like yourselves who haven't been sucked in by all the fear of weapons and lies about waste and things like that. And you can just go away and look it up. And then if you have those groups kind of putting that fear into you, you can go, hang on a minute, no, I fact-checked this already, I already know. Which is almost like trying to get on top of it the way people are trying to do with vaccines as well. It's very similar.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. I've had these conversations with so my parents are very heavily involved with like XR and stuff, and my parents are like they're from they grew up in the 60s sort of thing. So when they hear nuclear, the first thing of course they think of is the Cold War and stuff like that. And I've had these conversations before of, actually I'm pretty sure nuclear's fairly safe, right? And yeah, it's. I imagine that's probably one of the major sticking points with like the older generation is the stuff of the Cold War is pretty much where they grew up and things. And I guess
Chernobyl and stuff.
And Chernobyl and all the threats from North Korea and stuff like that. It's very, very, very prevalent.
Yeah, I think there are those origins to do with weapons, which I didn't really grow up with, right? So maybe it's easier for me to step away. Also, I think popular culture's had like a heyday. It's had a great time with it. Like China syndrome. What happens if a reactor gets so hot it sinks? I mean, it's completely impossible. So hot it sinks and goes through the air. It's cool. I mean, really scared people. Simpsons has had this whole dialogue of like, who's the most evil person? Oh, it's the person who runs a nuclear power plant. And look at how they mismanage the waste. And those things do have an impact, and they do seep in. And I think they've helped to fuel fears, which is funny because you don't have that about fossil fuels. I talk to people about fossil fuels all the time and they don't have the same fears. And I'm like, seriously, like the numbers are telling you that they're killing people in huge numbers. And coal ash is more radioactive than nuclear waste. And they're just like, that's not true. So some of it is the communication, because then I tell people and they're like, right, okay, I'm going to go and change my mind on that and talk about it or write something about it. And I have managed to get people to write things about it in papers and newspapers and things like that, where before they were afraid to. And now they've learned, they've gone, oh, maybe actually we should be reporting on this sensibly, which is good. It's just a thing today happening with that water in Fukushima. I don't know if anyone's seen that. It was trending on Twitter earlier. About the headline. So Greta tweeted it, unfortunately, which is a shame because she's very evidence-led normally. And she tweeted about how they're putting this radioactive water into the sea. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's like the levels are so low. The levels of tritium are so low.
The normal levels.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if someone put a drop of a homeopathic liquid into your bath. And some people think that works. Some people think that's real. I've talked to those people, so it does exist. That does happen, but it's just the equivalent. But when I started saying that to people, they were kind of going, really? Because no one wants to be that person. So some people are most people are very receptive. It's only the old Greens on, and they still hold a lot of power because they're the ones that are like the climate activists. So maybe we do all need to get more kind of activist people evidence-based solutions, maybe that is the way forward. I mean, I'm thinking about it at the moment, wondering what can I do and how can I help change this? So maybe I'll end up doing that.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
There's that thing last year, I think, where they were trying to build a power plant on like a nature reserve, like a nuclear one, and it was just that got everyone.
Yeah.
So I wrote a article like this. Let me send it to you. It's the RSPB who are protesting the Sizewell B, no, not Sizewell C, Bradwell B. I've called them out on this, and I actually did try to have a meeting with them, but they were very unreceptive and wouldn't sit down and have a talk about it, because I think you should look at the data on nature basically around these places. So basically, because here's the article, because these plants are so well protected, and they just basically, like, the areas outside are just left, right? They're just left for nature. They actually have a lot of species around them. And so in that article, I looked it up, looking at Dungeness Power Reserve. It's actually like, it is on a nature reserve, and it's just like idyllic animals, right? People that go there are walking their dogs, they're not leaving dog poo, they're not shooting, they're really protected sites. It's actually, there's something people don't realise, that they're really good nature. And RSPB, and I say that in this article, they actually allowed a gas plant on their Southam Reserve. So what's happening there? I mean, you can look that up. It's in the article. It's all linked. They allowed a gas plant, but they won't allow a nuclear plant. Again, this is a big mistake. This is a big mistake. If you care about species, you've got to have the most energy dense, takes up the least land, isn't polluting option. That's it. They're weird though, because they have also, I don't really know what's going on at the RSPB. I'd love to talk to them. Haven't found them very receptive, have tried. It's interesting because they've also, if you look at their website, they've got a list of all the places they're protesting against. But it's not just nuclear, they've got wind and solar farms on there, like loads of them. So they protest all of them, but they did allow a gas plant. So what's happening there? I'm assuming that they were given a lot of money to allow it. But we shouldn't be allowing gas plants. I mean, come on, that should be bottom of the list. But do have a look at the article, it's all
it's like the arguments against wind turbines and things about how many birds they'll kill, and you've just got to kind of go, the numbers are actually quite small. Also, birds learn.
Well, to be fair, they only learn once if they die from conking it.
Like collective learning and stuff. So
yeah, it's a hard thing actually, I think, with turbines, because now there's this whole NIMBYism where people don't want them, and it's like, well, where are they going to go? I think that's the harder bit. And I think, again, people aren't really understanding the emergency situation we're in. We're not calling it a climate emergency lightly. Will be no birds left. Let's be honest. Will be no birds left if we don't bring down our emissions. That's what's going to happen. That's not alarmist. It's what the data is telling us. Species decline is already out of control. Like, look at how few species we have in Britain, and most of those are endangered. Hedgehogs endangered. When I was little, I used to see red squirrels. You don't see them now. When my kids are older, I think, what are they going to see? Just seagulls. In fact, seagulls are endangered. Everything is endangered. I'm just like, literally, seriously, guys, you care about birds. Build. No, it's a weird argument for an environmentalist to make, because I'm asking you to build more, not less. It's the opposite, right? It's always been about less. But this is a situation where we need to build more, and we just need to be mindful about where we put it and the local impact, and that's it. It's all mapped out already. We just need to do it. But I do worry about NIMBY attitudes, because I mean, that's a NIMBY attitude that the RSPB has, even though they allowed a gas plant on their Southern Reserve. And I think, again, that's going to be a problem, because we're quite, population density is high here. It's not a lot of land. I think all of those arguments are going to get worse. And then we're talking about changing agriculture, changing the way that people farm. But if you go back to the pie chart I showed you earlier, the big slice of the pie is still energy. That's kind of why I end up talking about it. I feel like agriculture is like something like 20%. I think that won't be as much of a challenge as energy. If we don't build it now, in 10 years we'll be saying, oh, if we do all of that, we'd have low carbon energy like France. But at the moment, that's not going to happen. We're just not building anything. And actually, the industry, from what I've read, don't want to come and build stuff here because it's expensive. Takes a long time because the governments don't fund it. So there's lots of different issues in there, which is why Japan and Russia have been making new reactors in 3 years. Like, that's how easy it could be if there wasn't all the protesting against it and all the massive regulations because people are over afraid, you know. And actually, I always say this about coal. It's funny. I was talking to an environmentalist about coal, and he said, well, it's okay to use it occasionally. And I said, it's okay if you just do that because it's not here. Imagine if it was here. Imagine if people here had to live, we don't even like living near airports. Do you know how many people would die from exposure to coal power plants? Like, if you live within the region of a coal power plant, your life expectancy is really low. It's just a simple fact. And actually, when we import coal from wherever, Poland, all the people that have to live around those power stations are poor, often marginalised communities. They can't afford to move. So things in that social justice aspect again, we can't just outsource the cost of our lifestyles. We either have it here or we don't have it at all, and no one wants coal here. But we're happy to burn it when it's coming from somewhere else, and we don't care about the impact on the people living there. And that's another big failure that the environmental movement has made. We have to care about these people. It's, you know, it's about more than just birds. Speaking as a bird lover, you know. But if you don't have more questions, I might log off and have some dinner. But do get in touch with me. Put my website in here. If you have any questions, you know, you might go away and like read something scary, or someone might say something to you and you think, oh, where can I find out about that? I will never make assertions that aren't based on evidence. I'll send you stuff to read and you can just decide for yourself. And I'm on Twitter as well, at @SeonTree. And also just worth keeping an eye on, because if I do end up launching something, I'd love to have people on board. But as I say, at this point, I'm just doing these talks and working out what the way forward is and what the best way to help change things is.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I mean, I'm always down for a good protest.
Oh, well, that's really good news. I'll stay in touch. Maybe that. I mean, I did some. I don't know if you saw it. I did a couple, but they were just little ones. I did one down Ipswich. It's funny because we went with the bananas. We were giving them out for free. We're saying, do you want a banana? It's radioactive. We'd have interesting conversations. Almost like 99% of the people we spoke to were already pro-nuclear because they didn't have the fears. They're not traditional Greens. And they were like, you know what? We want the jobs. Our children move away because there are no jobs here. We want them. So like they were really pro Sizewell plant. The biggest voice against it, that 1%, is Bill Turnbull. You know him? Celebrity. So if you Google him, he's all over the news protesting it. He has a second home there. He doesn't want, it's not even about nuclear. He doesn't want the noise from the construction. That's what we're talking about when we talk about social justice. And it's just like, how does he have a louder voice than all those people I spoke to?
I mean,
so
I guess
do more events there.
I guess they do talk about how the green movement is very much a middle class thing, and it shouldn't be, but yeah.
It's funny because when I was in Extinction Rebellion, so I was really, you know, in the core group in Extinction Rebellion. I helped come up with the messaging. I was one of their biggest spokespeople. And in the messaging team, we'd always come up with like, well, how do we appeal to people? And there was this whole thing where everyone was like, why don't we use this phrasing, everybody now? I said, just because you put it on a poster doesn't mean that's going to work, guys. Like, when you look at the reason, someone did research in our base, and it was like over 90% middle class white people, and also mostly Green Party members. So really a fringe group. And I always said this, like, we need to expand, which is why I founded the newspaper, because it was a way of reaching outside of our echo chamber bubble. And that newspaper, we'd publish it once a month. And it had, at the highest point, 180k distribution around the UK. It's printed on recycled paper. And it was all about climate issues, but just trying to get to people we weren't getting to. So people would post it through doors, give it out at tube stations, they'd leave it. You know, yeah, we had lots of really good responses to it. And the reason I was trying to do that was just stop it just being this really middle class, insular looking movement. And I don't know how we change that again, because again, when I look at it, that's always what all the green groups are. It's also what the Green Party is. And I know they recognise it. I think actually, if you don't put social justice in there and you don't care about poverty, or you don't talk about poverty, not that they don't care, but it's not like a core part of what they do, they're not going to appeal widely to people. I think that's just going to be it. And if they just talk about living with less, that's okay. If you can afford solar panels on your house and you've got a big garden and you know, you've got everything that you need. But for people who can't afford to pay more for electricity, or who can't afford an electric car, we've got to be honest that that's most people. Come on. Yeah. So, yeah. So maybe we need a more social justice based campaign that's still an environmental group, but it's evidence based. I would love to start that up. You know, maybe that's what I'll go away and do, and see if anyone's interested. Watch this space.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
this was very interesting.
Thank
you so much for coming.
And do
so much. That was...
Thanks.
welcome, and do get in touch if you have any questions or anything. I will reply. All right. Bye.
Awesome.